We're on page 129. Joseph. Somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean, 1939. 14 days from home. A day out from Cuba, the St. Louis threw a party. Streamers and balloons hung from the ceiling and decorated the gallery rails of the first-class social hall. Chairs and tables were pushed aside to make room for dancers. There was a feeling of a wild relief, as though they were dancing away all the stress of leaving Germany. The steward smiled with the passengers as they understood, but none of them could really understand, Joseph thought, not until their shop windows had been smashed and their businesses had been shut down. Not until the newspapers and radio talked about them as human monsters. Not until shadowy men had burst into their homes and smashed up their things and dragged away someone they loved. Not until they had been told to leave their homeland and never, ever come back. Still, Joseph enjoyed the party. He danced with his mother while Ruthie, Renata, and Evelyn ran in and out between people's legs all evening long. Joseph had been nervous about Cuba at first, scared of the unknown, but now he was excited to reach Havana, to start a new life, especially if it was like this. Joseph's father stayed hidden away in their cabin the whole night, sure this was all just another Nazi trick. The next morning, breakfast in the ship's dining room was interrupted by thundering, clanking sound of the anchors being dropped. Joseph ran to the window. Dawn had broken, and Joseph could see that Melicon, Havana's famous seaside avenue. The stewards had told them all about its theaters and casinos and restaurants and the Miramar Hotel where all the waiters wore tuxedos. But the St. Louis was still a long off from there. For some reason, the ship had anchors kilometers out of shore. "It's for the medical quarantine," a doctor from Frankfurt explained to the small crowd who had gathered with Joseph at the porthole to look at Cuba. "I saw them run up the yellow flag this morning before breakfast. We just have to be approved by the port's medical authorities first. Standard procedure." Joseph made sure he was on the deck first boat from the Havana Port Authority reached St. Louis. The Cuban man who climbed the ladder to the sea deck from the launch was very deeply tanned and wore a lightweight white suit. Joseph watched as Captain Schroeder and the ship's doctor met the man as he came aboard. The captain swore an oath that none of the passengers was insane, a criminal, or had a contagious disease. That was apparently all that should have been required, because when the port doctor insisted he still be allowed to examine each and every passenger, Captain Schroeder looked angry. He balled his fists and breathed deeply, but he didn't object. He gave a curt order to the ship's doctor to assemble the passengers in the social hall and then marched away. Joseph ran back to his cabin and burst in on his mother packing the last of their things. Ruthie was helping her while Papa lay on the bed. The doctor from Cuba, he's going to make all the passengers go through medical examination," Joseph told his mother, still panting as her rum. "They're gathering everybody in the social hall right now." Mama's shocked look told him she understood. Papa was not well. What if the Cuban doctor said he was too mentally disturbed to be allowed into Havana? Where would they go if Cuba turned them away? What would they do? "Gathering us?" Papa said. He looked even more frightened by the prospect that Joseph's mother had. Like a roll call?" He stood up and backed against a wall. "No," he said. "The things that happen at roll call, the hangings, the floggings, the drownings, the beatings." He wrapped his arms around himself, and Joseph knew his father was talking about that place. Dachau. Joseph and his mother stood like statues, afraid to break the spell. "Once I saw another man shot dead with a rifle," his father whispered. "He was standing right beside me. And I couldn't move, and I couldn't make a sound, or I would be next." "It's not going to be like that, dear heart," Mama said. She reached out to him tentatively, gently, and he didn't flinch under her hand. "You were strong once before in that place. We just need you to be strong again, and then we'll be in Cuba. We'll be safe forever, all of us." It was clear to Joseph that his father was still lost in his memories of Dachau as they led him in the social halls. Papa looked frightened, jittery. It scared Joseph when his father got this way, but he was even more scared that the doctor would see Papa's condition and turn them away. Joseph and his family joined the other passengers standing in rows, and the doctor walked among them. Papa stood beside Joseph as the doctor got closer. Joseph's father began making a low, keening sound like a wounded dog. Papa was starting to attract the attention of the passengers around them. Joseph felt a bead of sweat roll down his back underneath his shirt, and Ruthie cried softly. "Be strong, my love," Joseph heard his mother whisper to his father. "Be strong, like you were before." "But I wasn't," Joseph's father blubbered. "I wasn't strong. I was just lucky. I could have been me, should have been me." The Cuban doctor was getting closer. Joseph had to do something, but what? His father was inconsolable. The things he saw, Joseph couldn't even imagine. His father had only survived by staying quiet, by not drawing attention to himself, but now he was going to get them sent away. Suddenly, Joseph saw what he had to do. He slapped his father across the face. Hard. Papa staggered in surprise, and Joseph felt just as shocked as his father looked. Joseph couldn't believe what he'd just done. 6 months ago, he would have never even dreamed of striking any adult, let alone his father. Papa would have punished him for such disrespect. But in the past 6 months, Joseph and his father had traded places. Papa was the one acting like a child. Joseph was the adult. Mama and Ruthie stared at Joseph, stunned. But he ignored them and pulled his father back in line. "Do you want the Nazis to catch you? Do you want them to send you back to that place?" Joseph hissed at Papa. No, his papa said, still dazed. "That man there," Joseph whispering, pointing to the doctor. "He is the Nazi in disguise. He decides who goes back to Dachau. He decides who lives and who dies. If you're lucky, he won't choose you. But if you speak, if you move, if you make the slightest sound, he will pull you out of line, send you back. Do you understand?" Joseph's father nodded urgently. Beside him, Mama put a hand to her mouth and wept. But she didn't say anything. "Now, clean yourself up quickly," Joseph told his father. Aaron Landau dropped his wife's hand, dragged his oversized coat sleeve across his face, and stood rigidly at attention, eyes forward, like a prisoner. The doctor came down their row, looking at each person in turn. When he got to Papa, Joseph held his breath. The doctor looked Joseph's father up and down, then moved on. Joseph sagged with relief. They'd made it. His father had passed the doctor's inspection. Joseph closed his eyes and fought back tears of his own. He felt terrible for scarring his father like that, for making Papa's fears worse instead of better. And he felt terrible for taking his father's place as the man in the family. All Joseph's life, he had looked up to his father, idolized him. Now it was hard to see him as anything but a broken old man. But all that would change when they got off this ship and into Cuba. Then everything would go back to normal. They would find a way to fix his father. The Cuban doctor finished his rounds and nodded to the ship's doctor that he approved the passengers. Joseph's mother wrapped his father in a hug, and Joseph felt his heart lift. For the first time all afternoon, he felt hope. "Well, that was a sham," said the man standing in line next to him. "What do you mean?" Joseph asked. "That was no kind of medical inspection. The entire business was a charade, a giant waste of time." Joseph didn't understand. If it wasn't a proper medical inspection, what had it all been for? He understood when he and his family lined up at the ladder on C deck to leave the ship. The Cuban doctor was gone, and he'd left Cuban police officers behind in his place. They were blocking the only way off the ship. "We've passed our medicals and we have all the right papers," a woman passenger said. "When will we be allowed into Havana?" "Manana," the policeman said in Spanish. "Manana." Joseph didn't speak Spanish. He didn't know what manana meant. "Tomorrow," one of the passengers translated for them. "Not today. Tomorrow." Isabel, page 136. The Straits of Florida, somewhere north of Cuba, 1994. 1 day from home. Isabel hit the water and sank into the warm Gulf Stream. It was pitch black all around her, and the ocean was alive. Not alive with fish, alive like the ocean was a living creature itself. It churned and roiled and roared with bubbles and foam. It beat at her, pushing her and pulling her like a cat playing with a mouse it was about to eat. Isabel fought her way back to the surface and gasped for air. "Isabel!" her mother shrieked, her arms stretching out for her, but there was no way her mother could reach her. The boat was already so far away. Isabel panicked. How was it so far away already? "We have got to get the boat turned," Isabel heard Louise cry. "If we don't meet the waves head on, they'll roll us over." "Dad!" Ivan yelled. Isabel spun in the water, and the wave slammed into her, filling her mouth and nose with salty water and sweeping her under again. The wave passed as she broke the surface, gagging and choking, but she was already moving toward the place where she had seen Senor Castillo's head before it went under. Her hand struck something in the dark water, and Isabel recoiled until she realized it was Senor Castillo. The sea was tossing him around, but he wasn't moving on his own, wasn't fighting to get back out of the water. Isabel took in as much air as she could and dove down beneath an oncoming wave. She found Senor Castillo's body in the dark, wrapped her arms around him, and kicked as hard as she could for the surface. The ocean fought her, sweeping her legs out from under her and spinning her all around, but Isabel kicked until her lungs were about to burst. At last she exploded up into the cold air, gasping. There they are!" Ivan cried. Isabel couldn't even try to look for the boat. It was all she could do to keep Senor Castillo lolling head above water and catch quick breaths before the waves rolled them both again. But the waves seemed to be smaller now, still deadly, but not as high and fast. Isabel began to feel the rhythm of the sea, the sing-song lullaby of it, and it was easy to close her eyes, to stop kicking, to stop fighting. She was so tired, so very, very tired. And then Ivan was there in the water with them, his arms around her like they were back in the village playing together on the waves on the beach. Here, they're here, Ivan shouted. Their boat was now alongside her, and her head thumped into the side of the wave wash over her. Hands lifted Senor Castillo from her, and soon they dragged her over the side, too. She splashed back down in the half-meter of water that filled the boat, but she was away from the waves, the never-ending waves, and she collapsed onto her mother's arms. Rudy, oh no, Senor Castillo cried, clutching her husband's hand. Senor Castillo was unconscious. Louis and Poppy had laid him out on the benches, and Isabel's grandfather was pumping his stomach like an accordion. Seawater blurbled out of Senor Castillo's mouth, and he suddenly lurched, coughing and spluttering. Lito and Poppy and Louis rolled him over, and he retched up the rest of the ocean he'd swallow. Rudy, Senora Castillo said. She wrapped him in her arms and sobbed, and then everything was quiet and still, but for the gentle lapping of the sea against the side of the boat and the sloshing water inside it. The tanker had passed. Amara stood at the back of the boat, keeping the rudder straight against the waves, but the engine was dead again. Like everything else, it had been swamped. Senora Castillo reached for Isabel's hand and squeezed it. Thank you, Isabel. Isabel nodded, but it came out more like a shudder. She was freezing cold and soaked from head to toe, but at least she was back in her mother's arms. Mommy hugged her close, and Isabel shivered. We need to get the water out of the bottom of the boat, Poppy said. It was strange to Isabel to hear her father talk about something so normal, so practical, when Senor Castillo had almost drowned and the boat had almost rowed over and sunk. But he was right. And get the engine running again, Ivan said. The water first, Lito agreed, and together they gathered up bottles and jugs and began the tedious work of filling them and pouring the seawater back into the ocean. Isabel stayed buried in her mother's arms, still exhausted, and no one made her get up. Where's the box with the medicine in it? Louis asked. There weren't too many places it could be in the small boat, and they quickly decided it must have fallen overboard in the confusion. Gone were their aspirin and bandages, and Senor Castillo was still dazed and weak. It was bad, but if they got the boat bailed out, and if they got the engine running, if they got back on track with the sun tomorrow, and if they didn't run into any more tankers, they could make it to the States without needing the medicine or the matches. If. They bailed water the rest of the night, taking turns dozing in the uncomfortable, crowded little boat. Isabel didn't even realize she'd fallen asleep until she jerked awake from a nightmare about a giant monster coming for her out of the dark sea. She cried out, looking this way and that, but there was nothing but blue-black water and gray skies, tinged with red, and the sun all around them for miles and miles and miles. She closed her eyes, took deep breaths, trying to calm down. The boat rocked again, and Amara struggled to keep the rudder steady. She had taken over as the pilot while Senor Castillo recovered, but they still hadn't gotten the motor running again. The Gulf Stream would carry them north toward Florida, but they would need the engine to reach the shore. Isabel's mother leaned over the side of the boat and threw up into the sea. When she slid back down inside, she looked green. The boat was rocking so much now, Isabel couldn't sit on the bench without holding on. The waves were going higher and higher. What is it? Ivan said sleepy. Another tanker? No. Red sky at morning. Sailors take warning, Lito said, looking up at the red tingle cloud. A storm is coming.